And now we're off to Melbourne City to talk with our new scientist correspondent, Janine Young, this morning. Good morning, Janine.
Good morning to you.
And today we're talking about the deep future. There's a big feature coming out in the latest New Scientist where they look and scan into the future because they reckon that we're going to be around for another 100,000 years, that is human beings on planet Earth. Personally, I think that's overly optimistic. But they've come up with a few ideas about what things will be like for humans in the future.
Apparently the overly pessimistic idea that we will wipe ourselves out in the very short term is a little bit too pessimistic. We'll certainly survive 1,000 years, and they're saying that in some form or other, very likely we'll survive 100,000. So let's take a look 100,000 years in the future. Bearing in mind that 100,000 years ago, going backwards that is, the earliest anatomically human creatures, if you want to call them that, were just emerging out of Africa. So 100,000 years is a very long time, and a lot of things can change in the meantime. However, if we were to look at, I don't know, where we'll live, let's have some thoughts about that because it's fairly topical. Obviously, we know that there's going to be issues with climate change and sea level rises and the like, but it's important to remember that the Earth has been changing for thousands of years. There's entire cities that are being found under the ocean, on the seabed, particularly in the North Sea. Fishing nets are bringing up all sorts of things that you think, well, what the hell is it doing there? Well, erosion of land has been happening for as long as anybody can remember, and that means that entire cities have disappeared underneath the ocean for a long time. This is currently happening to New Orleans and Shanghai, for example.
Yeah.
Even if we weren't dealing with climate change, we would still see them likely to disappear into the water at some point. Entire parts of the coast, I know certainly the southern coast of Victoria, various parts around England, I know they're disappearing already. If our climate was stable, we might be able to salvage them. But knowing that ocean level rises are going to happen, we don't know how far they're going to rise, but we know they are, then we need to start thinking about where we'll need to go. Melting of the Greenland ice sheet combined with the West Antarctic ice sheet disappearing within, say, 1,000 years means that the sea level could rise up to 10 metres. If a number of other ice sheets disappeared, then over time, over 5,000 years, we could end up with a 40-metre rise in water levels.
Huge.
Now, that's going to take out an awful lot of land. But if you're combining this with temperature increases of anything up to possibly 11 degrees, it could go that high over the next couple of centuries, then you're going to see different parts of the Earth opening up and becoming green and luscious. For example, Antarctica. At the moment, it's covered in ice, but if you actually have an 11-degree rise, then it's going to start shifting, and parts of the Earth are going to become so hot, certainly parts of Australia are going to be just uninhabitable, and various parts across the equator will do the same. We're going to have to travel more towards the poles because they're going to be a lot cooler. So it could be that we're finding ourselves in the Republic of Antarctica in 30,000 years' time, and plate tectonics and volcanism, so new volcanoes are creating new land all the time. There's the possibility that the Mediterranean could dry up because you've got Africa travelling northeast at, I think it's 2.5 centimetres a year, and Europe's not travelling quite that fast. So eventually they think the Strait of Gibraltar in a couple of million years might be closed off, and the Mediterranean will evaporate. Hey, we've got new land. So who knows what's going to happen, but it's pretty incredible to think about.
Well, either that, Kevin Costner had a solution, didn't he? And that was, you travel around on a boat.
Because Kevin Costner has the answer for everything.
Yeah, he does. You can always refer to him for most things. What about what languages will we be speaking? Will it be English or Chinese?
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting question because the popularity of a language and its longevity does depend on who's speaking it and how popular it is. We're very much dependent on Anglophone countries at the moment, so America and England and a lot of other countries that speak English at the moment. But if the rise of China does become as powerful as some are predicting that it will be, then we're obviously going to be learning Chinese, and our descendants are going to be more dependent on that over time. However, English has been around in some form or other for at least 1,000 years. I mean, Beowulf, for a start, we might not really be able to understand it now, although, Beowulf is my name. I think we can probably work out that Beowulf is my name. So if it's changed that much in 1,000 years, assuming that we will still be speaking English of some kind, then it's very likely that it's the dialects that we're seeing developing in Singapore and Jamaica and the like will possibly mean that English will probably fragment. And those dialects might mean that English could turn into something like Latin. It's alive. Well, it's actually dead, really, when you think about it. Yeah. Latin's a great language. And it means that you might have lots of sons of English. It might be vaguely recognisable, but it's very likely that if we do remain speaking English of some form, that you'll see grammatical changes, simplification of irregular verbs. People, if you don't use a verb very often, you kind of can forget that it's irregular, so you can use it in a different way. Change at the moment, we're seeing to wed, which is the actual verb. People say that they are newly wedded instead of newly wed. So this is changing as we speak. And you have, anything up to 2,500 words entering the Oxford English Dictionary each year, but there's likely to be thousands more than that aren't used very often. So language is constantly changing anyway. As much as we'd like it to say the same, it's not. So it's very likely that words like to be and to have, which are estimated to have a half-life of 40,000 years, will remain, whereas, other words are likely to disappear altogether because they're not used all that often. For example, the word we, as in we, has been around since the 5th century unchanged, whereas the word for stab was originally Ofstischen in the 5th century, was replaced by stab at around the 11th century, and it's stuck with us since then. So everything changes, and it's very likely there'll be some form of English. I might understand, what is your name, but I think in 100,000 years you'd still be struggling because language evolves. Yeah,
and I guess a lot of that evolution has happened through language being handed on, person to person, village to village, and also through literature as well. But I get the feeling, though, the people who are writing these articles for this section of the New Scientist may not have taken into account the internet and the effect that globalization of everything is going to have, particularly also in this next segment about what future generations will find out about us through garbage.
Well, yes, because unfortunately garbage is likely to be the main thing that's left behind as our legacy. All the books that we have produced are likely not to survive. Our bones are extremely unlikely to be fossilised. There's only very certain conditions, calcium-rich deposits in ponds or wetlands or the like, where you've got calcification that's going to happen a lot more quickly than degradation. You and I are unlikely to make any kind of dent in archaeological history. We'll just return to the Earth and become dust.
Really?
Let's be honest. Yeah, sorry. I think we're likely just to become Earth. However,
but what about my digital imprint? That's what I'm getting at. Is that there will be the world's data should be handed down in some form. It will be transferred to various different mediums and whatnot. And I don't know. Does the article take into account that, or is it all just about more physical kind of old school stuff?
It's mostly about physical old school stuff. But you and I have talked about the digital legacy before now, because storage is really only likely to last around 100 years or so on the best types of storage that they had. The hardcore ones that are meant to be kept for libraries and the like. There's a word for that currently escapes me. But for everything that we're doing now, the vast amount of rubbish data, Twitter, I'm having breakfast. Hopefully that won't survive, because it really shouldn't. That kind of stuff really probably not important. But in terms of, the important texts and all that sort of stuff, all it takes is a fire, and fire affects digital files as well, electricity outage, flood, any number of those things mean that our very fragile hold on our digital environment and digital legacy, I suspect it's going to disappear a lot more quickly than some of the books and tablets and the like. The Rosetta Stone is 2,500 years of history on one stone. We don't have Rosetta Stones anymore. So I suspect that the digital legacy in some respects is going to be lost. However, the titanium cases of a computer, for example, archaeologists may be looking at the front of a rotted out computer going, there's this religious significance in these Apple signals. On the cover, and there was some kind of religious... Think back how we look 1,000 years and we guess as to what religious significance was being ascribed to swords that are placed into shallow bits of water near causeways and that sort of thing. They're guessing, and frankly, who knows what's going to interest them in 100 years' time anyway.
Well, let's say Steve Jobs is some kind of deity or something, they'll
That's the thing. You just don't know how it's going to be interpreted
in
even 2,000 years' time as opposed to 100,000. It's such a long time. If you look backwards, as I said, the earliest humans were emerging out of Africa, and we have next to nothing about them, so we're guessing. And I suspect it will be exactly the same thing, because even though there will be information and history passed down the line, it changes and mutates over time, and people forget things, and depends on who it's passed to and in what form. And I mean, family histories are bad enough, let alone history of World War II.
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating feature, and I recommend picking up the latest New Scientist magazine to find that about the deep future. And talking about the near future, you will be able to find this as a video once more up at kiwifm.co.nz. For how long, I really couldn't say. That's fairly uncertain and certainly not written in stone. Janine Young, thanks very much. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.